Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Matt Freeman, and I'm back from butchering some villages at the behest of an evil witch.
And I'm Elliot Diebold, and I'm still a good person because I only watched and wrote about it. Uh, s
So, yeah, welcome everybody. We're about to talk about the Black Company this week.
yes, so just again, I'm Elliot. For those of you who haven't seen or heard me before, and I hope you're having a wonderful Friday evening over there in the US. I'm sure we all know a lot of you guys, but if you're joining us here for the first time, welcome. We're Doof Media, and we make podcasts about all the stories we love. We also arrange and organize a monthly book club. So, Matt, why don't you explain that in more detail?
Well, normally each month, my usual co-host Scott and I will select 5 books from a pool submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll of all the supporters, for all of our supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia, and then we let them vote on which book they'd like us to read and talk about. And the book with the most votes wins the month, and then we all read it together.
Yeah, and so then we all meet up on the last Friday of every month, and we talk about that book. We pull a bunch of interesting or important moments, and dive into them for a couple of hours. So for everyone in the chat right now, feel free to hit us up, make comments, and ask questions as we go, because we want this to be as interactive as possible. So why don't you tell us more about this month's book,
So
Matt?
this month, our patrons have sent us into the world, the dark world of Glenn Cook's Black Company series, with the first book titled simply The Black Company. And the summary from Goodreads is as follows. Some feel the lady, newly risen from centuries in thrall, stands between humankind and evil. Some feel she is evil itself. The hard-bitten men of the Black Company take their pay and do what they must, burying their doubts with their dead. Until the prophecy, the White Rose has been reborn, somewhere, to embody good once more. There must be a way for the Black Company to find her. So begins one of the greatest fantasy epics of our age, Glenn Cook's Chronicles of the Black Company. Huh.
Yeah, I mean, that's the description that's on the back of my copy of the book as well. It's not a very good summary of the
No,
book, is it? Like
not
it's
at all. It's
um
that's just that
it,
yeah, that's on the back of my book. That might be a good
um
description of the series. I don't know because I've
yeah.
only read this book, but that's almost a deeply disingenuous attempt at summarizing. I wonder if
Yeah,
we can
that
do
that
better.
sounds like it has a lot more to do with the plot that's set up at the end of the book for the sequels than it does for this one. Wait, there's no effort to find the White Rose in this book. They accidentally stumble upon her for starters.
Right.
Um so yeah, like I mean, I guess the first bit is pretty good, but I'd more focus on how the Black Company is, taking their pay, doing what they must, and working for the bad guy,
Yeah.
basically.
Right. They're. I mean, for most of the book, you think they're fighting the good guys who are fighting for their own freedom. It's not until the end that you even begin to doubt that's the case, and even then, the person who's telling you that is the evil witch. So, so
Yeah,
people. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then we also get another twist that reveals that she's probably even worse than we originally thought too. So there's just
Yeah.
a whole lot of bad guys floating around.
So we've got a few people filing into the chat here. We've got Sarah Penguin saying hi. Kyle S says that summary seems to cover more like the first couple of books rather than book one. I'll take your word
Yeah,
for it, Kyle.
I mean that
Um,
would make sense. Yeah.
so Elliot, what were your overall impressions with this book?
Um, yeah, I'm glad that this book was picked for the book club, so I felt more compelled to finish it because I think without the book club, I might have dropped off about a third of the way through. I found it really disjointed and confusing to start with, but once I felt like the book found its momentum and started telling the story it actually wanted to tell, I got a lot more into it, and like I'm excited to kind of keep pushing forward with our ragtag team of maybe not completely terrible people.
Yeah. I always do the audiobook, as is my habit, and did it again this time. And I found the audiobook reader to be really good, and I think that actually helped me be into it. Like, I don't know, I kind of bought the audiobook reader as Croaker because the book is so, the point of view is so in the head of Croaker.
Yeah.
and that kind of endeared me to the character. So I definitely detected the disjointedness, and we're definitely going to talk about that more. But it actually sounds like I probably enjoyed this more than most people do. In fact, when I told somebody, one of my acquaintances, one of my friends, that I was going to read this book, they were like, "Oh no, it's terrible," and so I was kind of not looking forward to it so much. But it wasn't nearly as bad as I was afraid it would be, to put it
Um,
mildly.
y- yeah, I mean, I definitely came right around by the end, but I'm glad I was sort of forced to push through. I also listened to the Audible audiobook, and I agree the guy who read it had the perfect voice to sort of
Uh huh.
introduce you to this world. But yeah, yeah. I mean, should we just get into it and we can talk more about
Sure.
individual things as we go?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Sarah kind of agrees that the chapter did the book didn't do a lot for them. Um, Skipped over the fights a bit too much. Should have focused more on the background characters. All right. So yeah, let's get into these. So here we have our first slide.
Yes, so this is from chapter one, Legate or Legate. I'm not actually sure.
Yeah.
Um, and this really introduces us to this grim, dark world, and the kind of sardonic voice of Croaker. So it starts off with, "There were prodigies and portents enough," One Eye says. "We must blame ourselves for misinterpreting them. One Eye's handicap in no way impairs his marvelous hindsight. Lightning from a clear sky smote the necropolitan hill. One bolt struck the bronze plaque sealing the tomb of the four Valaka, obliterating half the spell of confinement. It rained stones. Statues bled. Priests at several temples reported sacrificial victims without hearts or livers. One victim escaped after its bowels were opened and was not recaptured. At the Fork Barracks, where the urban cohorts were billeted, the image of a Tukes turned completely around. For 9 evenings running, 10 black vultures circled the bastion. Then one evicted the eagle which lived atop the paper tower. Astrologers refused readings, fearing for their lives. A mad soothsayer wandered the streets, proclaiming the imminent end of the world. At the bastion, the eagle not only departed, the ivory on the outer ramparts withered and gave way to a creeper, which appeared black in all but the most intense sunlight. But that happened every year. Fools can make omens of anything in retrospect.
So I find like every book club we've ever done, I've found that the opening lines of the book were the key to understanding the whole book. And right here you've
Mm,
got everything, right? You've got his humor, his sardonic humor. You've got kind of just the built-in comedy of how ridiculously bad this world is. Like it just kind of keeps getting worse. Like just the second paragraph where it's just like he just keeps listing terrible shit that's happening, thing after thing, and then like stuff like a victim escaped after its bowels were open and was not recaptured. It's just like that's, I mean, maybe I'm just like a dark evil person, but to me that's funny. um
no, it is, and I mean it all comes to a head at the end when it's just like, but that happens every year. Like this is just normal levels of horrible for everyone in this world.
exactly, yeah, it's definitely setting you up. Okay, this is our grimdark world. And this is something we didn't really mention, but everyone refers to this book as being the original grimdark fantasy. And I mean, the word grimdark, I'm pretty sure, came around with Warhammer 40k. So I think Warhammer 40k was the original grimdark, but I think what they mean is this was the original, like, let's just really trudge through the shit of life. Then
Yeah,
the world is horrible, and that's the kind of subgenre this opened up.
I mean, there are a lot of parts of this book, and I assume the series, that to me feel like a direct response to Tolkien. Like, and Tolkien obviously birthed modern fantasy in a lot of ways. And there's a lot. I think there's a few times we're probably going to talk about something that is directly kind of coming back at something from like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think you're right. Yeah. All right. Anything else to say about this slide?
Um, No, it
Okay.
was it was just great. I do feel, I guess, while we're here, this
Sure.
obviously sets up Beryl, the city that we're in.
Yeah.
Um, so and then like I feel like we spend a lot of time. in this passage and the rest of chapter one setting up Beryl, and then we just kind of leave, and maybe they come back in a later book and all that world building. But it almost feels like there's so much set up in Beryl, and then it's just like, no, it's just one little city that we don't even care about.
I do wonder. Yeah, I wonder if this book. Maybe I should have researched this, but I wonder if this was serialized because the book feels like it exists in several distinct chunks, and the early part of the book, like the whole For Valaka part, is almost like the novella or a short story or
Mm.
something, right? Like up until they leave the city with a For Valaka on a ship. Um, it could be its own story almost.
Yeah,
Um,
you could definitely publish the first chapter as like a sample. And I mean, well, this is, as a fantasy series, it's a series that is published. Or well, the first book is clearly part of a series. Like, there's no pretending that this is a standalone story. And I guess that carries even within the book.
yeah, people in the chat are saying interesting things. Marshall says the majority of the details aren't written; they have to be discovered in what Croker doesn't say.
Yeah.
So that's interesting because I there were a bunch of times in this book where I was like, that's odd. I wonder if that's going to be explained later, and then it never is. So it's one of those books where you definitely have to I don't know, maybe you have to reread it, or I googled some stuff afterwards because I was just like, okay, I just don't know what this was leading towards. And we'll probably talk about a couple of those things,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think that's like one thing. I don't think we have a slide on it, but like apparently I was just supposed to get that the captain totally kills the first guy who's there.
The
The
Syndic.
Yeah, the syndic, and it's like Croker thinks that maybe he did, but I think that you're supposed to realize that Croker doesn't want to think the worst of his brothers, and the captain absolutely did that, which I guess makes sense. But yeah, I definitely didn't read the book as Croker being naive. Like I thought Croker was, pretty with it. So I don't know.
I more got the impression that he knows, but he's not letting himself
Uh huh.
know. Like he's trying to pretend he doesn't know that.
Okay.
So not naive so much as delusional, I guess.
Okay. Sure. I'll buy that. I like that read. All right. Next slide. So this is the company enters the tomb of the Forvalaka, the were panther, and finds its occupant has already left. Nothing human killed that way, yet the damage seemed deliberate, calculated, the work of malign intelligence. That made it more horrible. I swallowed, knelt, began my examination. Silent and Goblin eased into the tomb. Goblin had a little amber ball of light rolling around his cupped hands. No bleeding, I observed. It takes the blood, Tom Tom said. Silent dragged another corpse out. And the organs when it has time. The second body had been split from groin to gullet. Heart and liver were missing. Silent went back inside. Goblin came out. He settled on a broken grave marker and shook his head. Well, Tom Tom demanded. Definitely the real thing. No prank by our friend, he pointed. The Northerner continued its patrol amidst the swarm of fishermen and coasters. There were 54 of them sealed up here. They ate each other. This was the last one left. Tom Tom jumped as if slapped. What's the matter? I asked. That means that thing was the nastiest, cunningest, cruelest, and craziest of the lot. Um, yeah.
uh,
So I just pulled this out because it's just like a great example of over the top horrible the shit the book loves to just wallow in.
yeah, I think this is really where you start to get a sense of how, like, beyond it, the humans are in this world. Like, the humans are just kind of pawns, and that's a
Uh-huh.
recurring beat that's sort of hit throughout the book. And this is where you really start to feel it. I think like there's this horrible monster that takes blood, and all the wizards are like super afraid of, and it's just like, Croker as a mere mortal just kind of has to deal with it.
Yeah. It's like borderline immortal. They don't really have any way of dealing with it, but they're gonna have to. Yeah. That was definitely effective. I thought that was some effective writing. The whole Forvalaka saga,
Yeah.
which we're kind of
And
gonna skip over in our summary, but
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it does come back at the end in a nice way. Like, I liked how the Forvalaka did come back in the final battle at Charm.
yeah, it's true. It's true. David, in reference to our last the last thing we were talking about, where uh, Croker doesn't quite want to say that the captain killed the syndic. Well, he's the analyst, so if he writes it down, then it makes it real forever. That's a
Yeah,
good point,
true.
David. Like he wants to make the company look better than it is because he loves the company, and that's I think that's a really interesting idea here. That like the Black Company is basically this amoral mercenary company. Like they would be the bad guys in Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
clearly. But he's just this poor soul lost in this world, and he's doing his best. And he's found these friends that he cares about, and he's just trying to do right by them. And so he finds belonging and everything with the company, and it makes him a fantastic and interesting protagonist in that way. Um, but
Yeah, I mean, I really love him as like the point of view character for this book for so many reasons. Like he is quite distant and disconnected from everything except the company, and so his role as the analyst and the way we see it all through his annals is sort of perfect for that. Like, um, and as a medic as well, like someone who isn't amongst, or he in a way he's amongst the filth of this world the most, being the medic of the company, but he's also not directly involved in it. Like he's there in the aftermath and has to deal with it.
yeah, yeah, that's perfect, and that's I'm glad you brought that up because we're almost going to gloss over the fact that he's like the number one company medic, or maybe even the only company medic, and he's like this, apparently pretty skilled and experienced battlefield surgeon, and so his role in this bunch of cutthroats is to be the healer. He's the guy who keeps everybody safe, and he looks after everyone. He not just physically too. I think he's kind of looking after the emotional and spiritual well-being of the company as well as he can. Not
Mm.
that not that there's much they can do, but he tries. And of course, we have to mention his name, Croker. Croker as the nickname for the surgeon is just the best, cleverest thing ever.
It's not a great.
Yeah,
It doesn't set a great tone for them, which is fun.
yeah, right.
Um,
Well, it's perfectly in line with their normal, with the normal sardonic humor of the whole thing. So,
yeah, yeah, totally.
okay, all right. Next page.
Yes, and so here we have a bit from where the Forvalaka is terrorizing the city of Beryl, and basically they start to have a debate about whether or not it's worth sticking out with their current contract to fight the Forvalaka. So the moral dilemma escalated with the stakes. We aren't heroes, the captain continued. We're tough, we're stubborn, we try to honor our commitments, but we don't die for lost causes. I protested, the voice of tradition questioning his unspoken proposition. The question on the table is the survival of the company, Croker. We have taken the gold, Captain. Honor is the question on the table. For 4 centuries, the Black Company has met the letter of its commissions. Consider the Book of Set, recorded by the analyst Coral, while the company was in service to the Archon of Bone during the revolt of the Chiliarchs. You consider it, Croker. I was irritated. I stand on my right to speak as a free soldier. He has the right to speak, the lieutenant agreed. He is more traditionalist than I. Okay, let him talk. We don't have to listen. I reiterated that darkest hour of the company's history, till I realized I was arguing with myself. Half of me wanted to sell out. Croker, are you finished? I swallowed. Find a legitimate loophole, and I'll go along.
That's so great. This might be my favorite paragraph from the perspective, or my favorite section from the perspective of looking at Croker's character. As people in the chat, I'm gonna just like steal some ideas from what people in the chat are saying. This idea that he's a self-professed, self-described romantic, as Marshall says, but he's also a human, and he's terrified and selfish and cowardly and self-interested and wants to protect his brothers. But at the same time, there's this tension where he finds the idea of the company and its ancient history of the company as being this very romantic thing that he wants to to protect, and stuff like I stand on my right to speak as a free soldier. Like he's the ceremony
Mm.
of it, and the kind of the romance of the annals and being an analyst and all that, and so it's all of that tension I feel is wrapped up in this great this great section. Even stuff like he's kind of speaking in these highfalutin terms. We have taken the gold, Captain. And then he's like, the Book of Set, recorded by the analyst, blah 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 blah. And then the captain is clearly annoyed. Is clearly, you consider it, Croaker. Like I don't give a shit, Croaker. Like just can we get on with this?
Yeah,
It's
the
perfect.
excessive amount of detail in
Yeah,
what he's talking about, like the Book of Set, recorded by analyst blah at the company during blah, and it's just like, oh, like who cares?
yeah.
Like he almost feels like someone who's trying to live in a Tolkien-esque fantasy world, but is stuck in a grimdark fantasy world.
I love
Like
that.
he's trying to make it so that he can feel like everything's not horrible.
That's awesome. I love that idea. As yeah, that's wonderful. That almost seems like the key to unlocking what the premise of this book is, where it's like, yeah, it is this horrible world, but it's this guy who, in his own mind, he's working with Aragorn and stuff. Um, so okay,
Yeah. And then obviously I think this is the moment where when Croker gives in, then the company does betray the Syndic, and then they end up in the shitstorm that is the Northern continent.
yeah,
So this is, he makes this moral compromise, and it doesn't at all work out for them.
yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting how many like the struggle also between being brave and being cowardly, I suppose. Like here we basically
Mm.
see him being cowardly. I haven't really developed this thought beyond the observation, but there's a bunch of times in the book where he's terrified, and sometimes he pushes himself past his fear, and sometimes his fear motivates him to not do the thing that he's terrified of. Which is it's all fair. Like
Mm.
he's always in these horrible situations where fear is totally justified. It's just like yeah, here is definitely one of them.
Yeah, well, this is where his attempt to pretend that the world is honorable kind of falls apart, and he can't keep pretending.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, next slide. So here, um, what we have is we learned that the mysterious, I'm going to say legate, I don't actually know how to say that word either. And the mysterious legate who has enlisted in the Black Company is basically Sauron.
Or the Witch King of Angmar,
Or yeah,
maybe.
that's a better comparison. That's excellent. The legate laughed. You don't know your history well enough. We weren't destroyed, just chained and buried alive. His laughter had a hysterical edge. Chained, buried, and eventually liberated by a fool named Bomans, Croaker. I dropped to my haunches beside One Eye, who buried his face in his hands. The legate, the terror called Soul Catcher in the old tales, a devil worse than any 10 for Valaka, laughed madly. His crewmen cringed. A great joke enlisting the Black Company in the service of evil. A great city taken and little villains suborned. A truly cosmic jest. The captain settled beside me. Tell me, Croaker. So I told him about the domination and the dominator and his lady. Their rule had spanned an empire of evil unrivaled in hell. I told him about the 10 who were taken, of whom Soulcatcher was one, 10 great wizards, near demigods in their power, who had been overcome by the Dominator and compelled into his service. I told him about the White Rose, the Lady General who had brought the Dominator down, but whose power had been insufficient to destroy the Dominator, his lady, and the 10. She had interred the lot in a charm-bound barrow somewhere north of the sea. And now they're restored to life, it seems, I said. They ruled the Northern Empire. Tom Tom and One Eye must have suspected. We've enlisted in their service.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So, there's a lot I want to say about this slide. In particular, this giant info dump paragraph, which is
Mm.
which is characteristic of the book. Like it happens a bunch where he'll just kind
Yeah.
of go into an aside basically, and it makes a lot of sense for him to do it as the analyst, this guy who's kind of like there's even a parenthetical here, which is not normal for a book or for a
Mm.
novel rather. Um, but yeah, I don't know. How did this work for you? This his tendency to kind of interject himself into paragraphs.
Yeah, it took me a while to actually grok that this was the annals, kind of,
Uh
that,
huh.
that we're reading. And so it made a lot more sense once that sort of clicked in my head. But it definitely, I think this was part of what took me a while to get into this book is the very disconnected nature of how he writes the annals. And I think that that's perfect for what the book is trying to do. Like we're talking about a world where everyone's miserable and kind of numbed and made null by like everything that's going on. Um, so I think it's a perfect framing device, but it took me a while to get into it.
I agree. Yeah, it took me a while to realize that we were reading the annals. In fact, I think I may have almost been done before I was like, okay, yeah, this is definitely what's supposed to be going on here. But aside from that, like just as a technique, sometimes I felt like it worked great for me. Sometimes it didn't. Like he'll switch off between like very immediate prose, like the captain settled beside me. Tell me, Croaker, which is a very like like close third person type of narration,
Yeah.
and then he'll switch immediately to a summary of the next thing that happened, which is a by def like a distant. I'm telling you this story type of narration, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's a great device to have on hand as the author to just be able to focus on the bits you want to focus on. And I apply that to Glenn Cook as well as Croker. Like there are definitely moments where it's important what Croker is writing about and what he isn't. And so like, I think Glenn Cook gets to use it as a device as well.
yeah, that's a great point. Sure, I mean, yeah, it works. It works in a very interesting meta way, right? I think people in the chat were kind of pointing out that it allows him to skip over things that he wants to kind of not look at directly by just kind of glossing over them.
Mm,
But of course, on the meta level, Glenn Cook is making sure that we know what's happened, or at least have a hint at what's happened.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about Soulcatcher a little bit because here Soulcatcher's
Mm.
introduced. Marshall in the chat says Soulcatcher is their favorite character. Soulcatcher's might be my favorite character too.
He slash she is definitely right up there. They're very fun.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're complicated, right? It's
Yeah,
not like you kind of go back and forth in your thinking of like, okay, is this just a evil monster, or is it like do they have a long con and they're pretending to be an evil monster? I'm not exactly sure. And by the end, I think that I'm leaning toward the combination of they have a long con and they're not really an evil monster, plus they're under the subjugation of the lady, and so they're compelled to do a lot of bad things. Um,
yeah. I mean, definitely. I definitely think there's some independence there, but it's doing well. Soulcatcher in a lot of ways was a bit like the Black Company. She's under the service of the lady and had to do awful things, but was sort of trying to get out.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I mean, I think I think that we and a bunch of people in the chat are on the same page that we found the disjointed nature of the storytelling a bit jarring. But one thing I did appreciate about the way this first bit was set up is like we've got the whole thing with the Forvalaka where the company really would like to just break their commitment and run, but they take their commitment seriously enough that they can't just do that without a pretext at the very least.
Yeah.
So we understand. Okay, the company takes their commitments fairly seriously, and thus we understand why they feel obligated to honor their commitment to who they then find out is basically Satan. Like
Yeah.
it's not an option to them to just be like, oh, we didn't realize who we'd signed up with. Well, never mind then. Like the story sets it up for us where it's like, oh no, we see why they've enlisted, they've signed the papers or whatever. They're gonna go through with it, and I think that's good. That's well set up.
Yeah, and sneakily killing Soulcatcher is not going to be an option like it was with the Syndic.
Yeah, true. So there's this last line here. Um, oh wait a minute. I'm yeah. So that, not in this quote because it was too long for me to pull out the whole thing. But they look over at like Croker looks over at like the cage that's holding the Forvalaka, and it's like there's something off about it. Like Tom Tom or no Tom Tom's dead. One eye is like
Mm.
glaring at it with hate, and Croker realizes there's been some subterfuge. But I have no idea whatsoever what the subterfuge was supposed to have been.
I, I think, and like commenters correct me if I'm wrong. The the Forvalaka in the cage didn't have the injuries that happened to whatever they fought in the barracks.
Right.
So I think the implication that Croker picks up on is that whatever they fought in the barracks is not what has been captured here.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's hinted later in the book that it was actually shapeshifter.
So I just missed that because I actually did Google this because I was so confused, and people did say that there was that hint about shapeshifter. So good job catching that hint. I totally missed
Um,
that.
it didn't all come together for me until we saw the fourth locker at the end. But
Uh,
yeah, it definitely it takes a while to pay off.
so that's just so confusing to me though because we haven't met. Like I mean that's the kind of thing about this book that I'm not sure if I love is like, but we haven't met shapeshifter. Like that's such a you're really okay. Well, I guess if you caught it, then it's catchable. I just didn't catch it. I think that's one of
It's
the.
definitely missable.
I don't even know when it was. I think I might have just lapsed in my attention. I guess that's one of the dangers of the audiobook.
Yeah, it's fairly late in the book. I
Okay.
can't remember exactly where it was, but yeah.
Okay. Oh well. All right. Next page.
Yes, and so here we have an excerpt from as the company is making their way north, now under the employ of Soulcatcher, and they're heading into the lady's proper kingdom. Our northward journey continued, past Elm, into the Salient, past Roses, and northward still, into the Fallsburg. That one-time kingdom had become a bloody killing ground. The city all lies in the northmost Fallsburg, and in the forests above lies the Barrowland, where the lady and her lover, the Dominator, were interred 4 centuries ago. The stubborn necromantic investigations of wizards from Ore had resurrected the lady and the 10 who were taken from their dark abiding dreams. Now their guilt-ridden descendants battled the lady. Southern Forsberg remained deceptively peaceful. The peasantry greeted us without enthusiasm, but willingly took our money. That's because seeing the lady's soldiers pay is such a novelty, Raven claimed, that they can just grab whatever strikes their fancy. The captain grunted. We would have done so ourselves, had we not instructions to the contrary. Soulcatcher had directed us to be gentlemen. We had given the captain a plump. He had given the captain a plump war chest. The captain was willing. No point making enemies needlessly. We had been traveling 2 months. 1,000 miles lay behind us. We were exhausted. The captain decided to rest us at the edge of the war zone. Maybe he was having second thoughts about serving the lady. And I mean, this passage presumably covers a lot more than 2 months. Like I think this is a great sort of excerpt that covers how disconnected and distant the narration is. I mean, we've already talked about it a bit, but there are a number of points in the book where we just have 6 or 7 month gaps, and Croker just sort of goes, and now we're on this part of the world and doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. He just kind of throws in a paragraph about the Taken and like very very high level summary of what's happening and now we're over here. Yeah, and it's almost like you drop into the new area and you have to figure everything out all over again. You're like, okay, wait a minute. Okay, there's
Mm.
we're fighting these guys, and this is the town that we're near, and somebody's so there's a there, I can't help but notice in context of what we've been talking about, the idea that like when he says stuff like maybe the captain was having second thoughts about serving the lady, that to me now looking back just looks like pure projection. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
captain just seems like an asshole actually. Like the captain, he says outright the captain wouldn't have been above just robbing people for food and lodging and whatever. It was their specific orders from Soulcatcher, who we learn is kind of a sophisticated figure, telling them, hey, pay people for their stuff, don't just take it. The captain doesn't care. The captain is
Yeah.
evil. But Croker likes to imagine that the captain is conflicted about serving the lady, which I think there's very little evidence for that, honestly.
No, the captain is on board with most of what happens throughout this book,
Yeah.
from memory. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it, it's interesting. My copy of the book, at least, didn't come with a map. Like it's a bit of a fantasy book trope to have a map of the world at the start, and like because as you sort of mentioned, this book constantly jumps to new locations as well as time periods, and there's no map like that. Doesn't necessarily mean anything to us. Like, to tell us that we're past Elm means absolutely nothing
Yeah.
to me, except the way it's often, it's past Elm, into the salient, past Roses. I'm like, okay, so it's very far. But we're often quickly introduced to each location as they get there with some little anecdote about what life is like there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. He just doesn't really care, right? Like I think
Yeah.
that's maybe how I would look at it is it's the opposite of Tolkien where Tolkien's like here I've made this super awesome world. I've spent my entire career building this super awesome world and all the languages in it, and now I'm going to drag you through every inch of this world that I've made because it's so awesome. And this guy is just like, all right, we're gonna go to a different setting now. It doesn't really matter.
Mm.
It's not important. It's not important how it's related to the other setting. Languages, I don't know. They all speak English. Fine, whatever. Their names are all English words. Okay, Croaker and Tom Tom and One Eye. Okay, and the
I,
captain. Yeah.
I do like that device though, because we talked a lot about how disconnected everything is, and I think having names that are just objects and not their true names, it has that.
Uh
This world also has that fantasy trope of true names have magical importance,
huh. Uh huh.
but that's used here to sort of as an excuse for everyone to have like these kind of shitty given names that aren't really, aren't their true names. Like this is
Yeah.
just their role almost.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. I like the idea. I mean, I think a name like Raven, for example, is more evocative than Elder Narafond or whatever it would be if it were
Yeah,
Tolkien.
sure.
It's
John.
yeah, yeah. 567 has a couple interesting remarks here that perhaps the author is going for, showing what it's like for the first person, perspective of one of these participants in one of these long term military campaigns where like he is just kind of writing it down as he sees it. Like he doesn't care to tell you that like Elm is along the river, blah blah blah, on the way to like he's just like yeah, all right, this is I'm going to tell this story now. This is what's relevant right now. Um,
Yeah.
does that that makes a degree of sense to me? Um,
Also, he's assuming that this would be being read by somebody in the world who would have access to a map or something.
uh,
Like, if we were talking about like modern America, you wouldn't feel overly necessary. You wouldn't feel it overly necessary to explain where Los Angeles is relative to, San Francisco or something. You just say we went past San Francisco down to Los Angeles.
uh-huh.
It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I like that. Um, yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Next slide. So here, uh, this is one of their many kind of quests, if you will, where they've been frustrated by a rebel leader named Raker, and Soulcatcher and the company set a sorceress trap for him. I still had not read the immortal message they had carved on the rock. I darted in for a look. Let he who would claim this wealth seat the head of the creature Raker within this throne of stone. Ah, aha. Plain spoken, straightforward, simple, just our style. Ha. I stepped back, tried to guess the magnitude of Soulcatcher's investment. I spied gold amidst the hill of silver. One bag leaked uncut gems. The hair, Soulcatcher demanded. One Eye produced the strands. Soulcatcher thumbed them into the walls of the head-sized cavity. He stepped back, joined hands with One Eye and Goblin. They made magic. Treasure, table, and stone began to shed a golden glow. Our archfoe was a dead man. Half the world would try to collect this bounty. It was too big to resist. His own people would turn on him. I saw one slim chance for him. He could steal the treasure himself. Tough job, though. No rebel prophet could outmagic one of the taken. Um, Pretty much just included this because I thought it was a fun plot device and a cool idea. This magical trap where, I mean, yeah, they basically say it right. Like either somebody's gonna kill him, even one of his own allies, or he could potentially sneak in and undo the trap himself. But it's such an enormous risk to do that it's just I don't know. It's just really fun scenario. Evil fun scenario.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great plan. I mean, if you're that rich and powerful, why would you do your own work? Just get your enemies to kill themselves.
Yeah.
Um, It's a really, yeah, it's a really smart play. And I mean, like, this sort of highlights something we've touched on, which is we're seeing this book from the perspective of the evil queen's minions, right? These are the equivalents of the orcs in
Yeah,
Lord of the Rings.
pretty much.
Uh, and I like how replaceable the circle felt from that perspective. Like, you can think about it from Sauron's perspective. He keeps having to knock down kings of Gondor and Rohirrim and all that, and it's just, it's just more meaningless rebels with silly names, and you knock one down and a new one pops up. Whereas the 10 who were taken and the lady are such pivotal cornerstones of the evil empire.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea that he's only really focusing on what's happening right in front of him. I mean, we do get a lot of like info dump type narration, but we never actually learn like, well, maybe we do, but I don't think we learn like the names of all of the circle. I don't even know if we learn the names of all of the Taken, do we? I mean, we definitely learn a lot of them.
It'd be close, but like
Yeah,
some of them are only mentioned once. Like, I wouldn't be able to recall all the names we've heard.
yeah.
And I mean, the circles, I think it's the circle of 18, but the thing is they die and replace so often.
Uh,
Even if we've heard 18 names, I don't think there's any guarantee that those were the 18 at any one point.
true.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, I just like how replaceable the rebels are as a
Yeah,
concept to the evil queen's minions.
yeah. So then, after this scene, we get the company basically Raven and Croaker assassinate Raker. They find him, they kill him, and then they steal the loot for themselves. And so, am I wrong, or is it that loot which they then use at the end, like which Croaker then gives to Raker at the end, or not Raker, Raven at the end?
Raven.
Yeah.
That was my one issue with the Raker plotline, is it's introduced at the same time as Raven, and I got both of them confused a lot.
Uh huh.
Uh, but yeah, I think the Raker money is what they give to Raven at the end of the book. Yeah, like
Yeah.
that's my understanding.
Which is a
Yeah,
nice little touch.
yeah.
I think we'll have a minute to talk about Raven later, but like I was I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel about Raven. Like
Me either.
obviously he's Croker's friend. Croker cares about him, but he's just such a blank slate to me. I don't know. I don't know. I don't care.
Yeah, yeah. I felt the same. He's so guarded that he just sort of doesn't have much of a personality. I feel like he's set up more for the second book now, that because his relationship with Darling, as Darling becomes more important, will become more and more important, because that's like his one connection to the world in this story is
Yeah.
Darling.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. Could be. Could be. Okay. Next slide.
So this next excerpt is just from one of the many times that the characters in this book play cards together. So Tonk, I said, slapping down 5 face cards given my on the deal. Ha! Double, you guys, double. Pay up. One Eye grumbled and growled and shoved coins across the table. Raven chuckled. Even Goblin perked up enough to smile. One Eye had not won a hand all morning, even when he cheated. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Deal, One Eye. What are you doing, Croaker? Eh? How are you doing it? The hand is quicker than the eye, Elmo suggested. Just clean living, One Eye. Clean living. The lieutenant shoved through the door, face drawn into a fierce scowl. Raven, Croaker, the captain wants you. Chop chop. He surveyed the various card games. You degenerates. One Eye sniffed, then worked up a wan smile. The lieutenant was a worse player than he.
I just kind of find this delightful. Like there's nothing happening here, right? It's just the kind of we're we intersperse the story with these moments where the company is just hanging out and being comrades. And I felt like it was actually important to pull out just one of these at least, because it feels like an important thing throughout the book. It's like this thing that weaves throughout the book, is this idea that these are all these people who spend so much time together. They care about each other so much. Yes, they're like these hard bitten, cutthroats, but they have this incredibly close comradeship, and just like just showing them kind of having their lazy, banter amongst themselves as they play cards. It just it's a great little snapshot of that, I think. And even the lieutenant, like, he kind of gives them a hard time about it, but then the last line is like, clearly he plays cards with them too. He's
Yeah.
yeah.
If it's like a classic, military or like soldiery vibe that they give off. And I agree. This is like these segments are very important for establishing the more human side of our characters, because otherwise we only see them in battle. And I think, again, this is one of those things where it's important to note that Croker bothers to narrate this, not just Glenn Cook.
Uh-huh.
In universe, Croker thinks that this is important. He wants to show the good side of the company, and this is his way to do that, is show what they're like when they're not, raiding villages.
Right. Yeah. Kyle in chat points out that Glenn Cook served in the military, which I didn't know. That
Yeah.
makes perfect sense because it's got this vibe of the military esprit de corps and the brotherhood. So
Yeah, I mean that is a big theme in the book, so it would make sense to understand that's where that's coming from. Yeah.
yeah, cool. Yeah, I didn't have a ton to say about that. Just humanizing them, making you care about their relationships. I don't think you'd care as much about like One Eye if you didn't kind of get to see him, be a
Mm.
poor sport about cards a little bit or something like that.
It does give off this weird thing though, like because I agree it's great, but there's this sense that there's like the core group of eight or so members of the Black Company, and then everyone else is a disposable foot soldier. Uh, and like you see this in TV shows a lot. There's kind of your core group of characters, and everyone else in the rebellion is just a face.
Uh-huh.
They're all red shirts basically. And that sort of comes across here. Like you can tell who Croker is close to specifically because they get so much more time in the annals.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he definitely cares about the company in the abstract, but then he definitely has his friends that he cares about.
Hmm.
I think that's a good segue actually to this next slide. So uh, here basically we see basically Croker has just done a reading of the annals to the company, which is something that he does intermittently, and Ultimate Badass Raven is touched by his reading. You were superb, Raven told me. Even I felt it. Eh? You made me understand what it meant to be a brother of the Black Company back then. What it still means to some. Yes, and more, you reached them where they lived. Yeah, sure. What are you doing? Fixing an arrow for the limper with his true name on it. Catcher gave it to me. Oh, exhaustion kept me from pushing the matter. What did you want? You made me feel something for the first time since my wife and her lovers tried to murder me and steal my rights and titles. He rose, closed one eye, looked down the length of the arrow. Thanks, Croker. For a while I felt human again. He stalked out. So there's a bunch of stuff I could pull out that's about Raven, but I wanted to use this as our framing device to talk about Raven. And we started to talk about him a second ago, but like for me, he's kind of like Aragorn. He's like evil Aragorn. And
Yeah.
I like how you mentioned he might become more of a character in the next book where he's like taking Darling, trying to protect Darling, because that's even more of an Aragorn-y thing for a character to do. But he's like, very serious, super deadly. You don't really know what his deal is. Hard to really care about him actually, but Croker cares about him. It's like I wouldn't care about him at all if it wasn't obvious that Croker cared about him. I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to think about this character.
I also think until towards the end of the book, Croker's care for Raven is almost purely not as a friend, but as someone who has an interesting story. Croker seems more interested in Raven's story than Raven until maybe towards the end, after they go through like so much shit together.
Uh huh.
Um, but I agree. Like Raven in this book seems to be someone who was completely broken by the events of his past, and perfect for joining the Black Company. And then he starts to find his humanity again, maybe at this point, but with Darling as well. And then we haven't really seen that delivered on yet. Like it feels like he's gonna have a much more interesting arc moving ahead in the series because, as you said, he's just kind of around for this one as someone who's quite empty.
Yeah, and it's interesting because maybe we're meant to be paying attention to what's happening in the background and paying less attention to Croker's specific takes on things because, like you said, he goes from being dead inside to being willing to sacrifice everything for Darling,
Mm,
and that's something that we don't really see happen. Like we know it's happening. We see it we see it through the cracks, right? We see it in the background.
yeah.
And thus it's harder to care about. But when you sit back from it, it's clear that that's what's happened. He's really paranoid about Croaker toward the end of the book because he thinks that Croaker has been like, I don't know exactly what he thinks actually. It seems to me that he thinks Croaker has been brainwashed by the lady, and so he now sees Croaker as an enemy basically.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's a very understandable
Yeah,
position given what Croker's been going through at that point.
right. Yeah. Um, so yeah, basically, there's this other aspect. I think I just want to drop this discussion in here because it makes sense to come in between this one and the next slide, which is like the lady and Soulcatcher keep tapping Raven and Croaker for these like commando missions. And I kind of
Mm.
understand why they would tap Raven because he has this reputation as an ultimate badass and he seems to be super deadly. But I have no idea why they keep tapping Croaker. Well, I don't have no idea. My only idea is what he kind of says toward the end of the book, which is that the lady wants him to be her scribe, wants him to write down her story. And so she basically wants him as like her witness for these things. But that doesn't really explain to me why she relies on him to be like a crack shot with a bow and arrow.
Yeah, I agree. I still feel like there's more to be learned with regards to why Croker was so interesting to both Soulcatcher and the lady. Because it doesn't feel like we have the whole answer yet.
Yeah,
It's kind of bizarre. Like the best explanation I have right now is it's because he's the main character. Um,
right.
but yeah, like it does feel weird to get the medic and be like, you better start to learn how to use a bow and arrow because you've got to snipe this really fantastic warrior from a couple of 100 meters away.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you were confused too, because yeah,
Yeah,
I definitely felt like I feel like the book is smarter than just making the mistake of being like he's the main character. So
yeah,
of course the Witch King of Angmar would give him a secret mission. It's like no, like what's special about Croker other than him being the analyst and a surgeon, right? Like okay, he's got two special things we know of. He's a medic. He's the analyst.
yeah.
Okay, I I don't get it.
Yeah, I think maybe there's more to be discovered there later in the books. Because especially something that's touched on a few times is how the Taken can see the future. So maybe this is Soulcatcher working off a vision they had. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that makes some sense. Yeah,
Like
I'll buy
maybe
that.
maybe it's something that comes together later.
I'll provisionally buy that. All right. Next slide.
And so the next slide is from after well, the first of these commando missions. Raven and Croker have helped Soulcatcher apprehend the Limper and Whisper, and the lady shows up for the first time to convert Whisper into a new Taken now that Limper is out of favor, or supposedly. Um, so the lady says, Croker, what you are about to witness exists only in a few memories. Even most of my champions have forgotten. What the hell was she talking about? She looked down. Whisper cringed. The lady said, No, not all that. You've been such an outstanding enemy. I'm going to reward you. Strange laughter. There is a vacancy among the Taken. And so then Croker talks about some stuff relating to this reveal, and then of the actual conversion, he says, Of the rest of it, there are only flickers of recollection, most filled with whispers, screams. There was a moment when the clearing filled with dancing devils, all glowing in their inner wickedness. They fought for the privilege of mounting Whisper. There was a time when Whisper faced the Eye. A time when, I think, Whisper died and was resurrected, died and was resurrected, till she became intimate with death. There were times when she was tortured, and another time with the Eye. The fragments I retain suggest that she was shattered, slain, revived, and reassembled as a devoted slave. I recall her pledge of fealty to the lady. Her voice dripped with a craven eagerness to please. Long after it was over, I awakened confused and lost and terrified. It took a while to reason out. The confusion was part of the lady's protective coloration. What I could not remember could not be used against her.
Yep.
So this is terrifying,
Yeah.
like existentially.
This is more of this incredibly dark, grimdark stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of great kind of evocative descriptions of the magic, and the eye. The eye is something that happens over and over, where it's just this. Okay, so speaking about Lord of the Rings, like this is the most like, yeah, okay, it's the lady is definitely Sauron, or channeling Sauron, I guess. Like I wouldn't be
Mm,
surprised to learn she's like a force that some greater evil force is acting through. Then again, Sauron is also just a sort of a servant of Melkor. So,
yeah,
but yeah, like it's just horrible, right? And again, he uses more. He doesn't shy away from it, right? Like this is a couple solid paragraphs of all of the terrible things that happened to her.
mm,
And yeah, just the idea that you're you're broken and then turned into a slave of your worst enemy, especially for like a really competent person like Whisper. Just yeah, it's horrifying. I love it.
yeah, and it really makes you understand why the Dominator and the Lady were so powerful, and why the Lady still is, because the ability to just take your worst enemies and turn them into your biggest assets is extremely powerful.
Yeah,
And like this was what made me start to realize that the Lady wasn't just this big bad evil powerful witch. She's like really clever, and I mean I guess that makes sense. But we start to see how cunning the Lady and is really.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And later on, we'll see like I think we may even have a slide about it. The specific idea that her goal with this entire campaign is to not only eliminate the circle, but to eliminate all of her own taken servants because she finds them insufficiently loyal. So
Mm.
like here she's found a new taken servant, maybe one that'll replace the old guard who she no longer trusts. I don't know. Maybe I'm maybe reading too much into it, but that's what I'm thinking here.
No, well, part of that bit that I sort of removed from the middle of this is where the lady kind of mentions to Soulcatcher that she can do this too. Apparently, it's news to the rest of the Taken that the lady also possesses what was thought to be the Dominator's ability to
Huh.
turn people into Taken. So I definitely agree that this is where we start to see a lot of that stuff that we don't fully understand till towards the end of the book.
Yeah, but I mean, like you mentioned, seeing her as being complicated. I'm going to contrast this with Lord of the Rings again, where like we never like Sauron never says anything. We
Mm,
like the close like we don't get insight into the evil chain of command. We don't know what they're thinking at any point really. Like
no.
and and they're just over there. They're just the evil over there. We have to fight them. They're super bad. We don't really understand why they're that way. But the book goes out of its way, especially as we get later and later into the book, to show that the lady is a human. She's a person. She has fears. She has desires. She definitely has some like mega sorcery, but like
Mm.
underneath all that, she's a person with normal human impulses and desires. Yeah.
Well, that's actually a great segue into the next slide.
Okay. Next slide. Wait a second. Da-da-da-da. Yes. All right. So this is. Um, Wait a minute. Did I skip something? Let's go through we're in this one. Okay. Yes. Sorry about that. So here we witness Goblin and One Eye engaging in one of their common wizard duels that they undertake helping the morale of the group. They were off, and damned be the fool who got in their way. Shadows scattered round One Eye, wriggling across the earth like 1,000 hasty serpents. Ghosts danced, crawling from under rocks, jumping down from trees, hopping out of bushes. The latter squealed and howled and giggled and chased One Eye's shadow snakes. The ghost stood 2 feet tall and very much resembled half-pint one-eyes with double ugly faces and behinds like those of female baboons in season. What they did with captured shadow snakes, taste forbids me tell. They do have more talent than one would suspect, Soulcatcher observed, but so wasted on frivolity. I don't know, I gestured. The show was having an invigorating effect on morale. Feeling a breath of that boldness which animates me at odd moments, I suggested, this is a sorcery they can appreciate, unlike the oppressive, bitter wizardries of the Taken. Catcher's black morion faced me for a few seconds. I imagined fires burning behind the narrow eye slits. Then a girlish giggle slipped forth. You're right. We're so filled with doom and gloom and brooding and terror we infect whole armies. One soon forgets the emotional panorama of life. How odd, I thought. This was a Taken with a chink in its armor, a soul catcher drawing aside one of the veils concealing its secret being. The analyst in me caught the scent of a tail and began to bay. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, there's like a lot to talk about here. I love these little wizarding duels. Like, I think it shows the human side of the magic in this, and as well as helping to establish the rules of that sorcery, in the story.
Yeah.
It's they're very fun. Like, I enjoyed almost all of them. Like the crazy, wacky stuff that One Eye and Goblin do to each other is right up there with the card games for me, and helping to humanize all these soldiers.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone earlier in the chat, I think it was Sarah, said that they didn't like the magic system. I feel like it's generous to call it a magic system.
Yeah,
It's just kind of whatever. And
definitely.
and the thing is, I don't think I disliked it actually. I think that this is not like, I definitely like magic systems with rules. I definitely like the Sanderson laws type of magic where you understand what's going on and you can track it and you can understand the stakes and all that. But this is also fun for me in a different way because it's really clear that the story is never going to hinge on on your understanding of magic. Like, it's just not. like
Yeah.
so uh and most of the magic is being used as a tool to make you feel how out of their depth these characters are and how
Yeah.
mysterious everything is and how you can't really predict what the consequences of certain things are going to be.
No, definitely. It still takes me a while for books like this for me to switch off the part of my brain that's trying to learn the rules of magic and just accept that that's not for us to understand in this. I mean, that makes sense. Croker doesn't know magic, so to him it's just magic. Um,
Yeah.
so he's not a magician. But yeah, I agree. Once you can make that mental leap to just accepting it's going to be magic, then it becomes quite fun.
Yeah.
Um, Also, like the first humanization we start to get of Soulcatcher in this segment. Um,
Yeah.
it's fun how she and the lady both sort of go through this thing of going from becoming icons to becoming more humanized, super beings, which obviously fits in with that reveal towards the end.
Yeah. That's true. And they almost seem to involuntarily let things slip. Like, they just can't keep up the facade constantly.
Mm,
Like, here it almost seems like Catcher is almost can't help herself. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know if I'm right, but that's my feeling. All right. Next slide.
yes. So now, as our core team of companymen stop by the base between missions, young Darling hops aboard Howler's carpet and takes off with them, which Raven is not impressed with. But Croker just has a chat with her. Um, so the carpet grounded. Brethren crowded around, anxious to see how we had done. Lies and jocular threats flew. The captain said, "You stay aboard. Croker, Goblin, Silent, One Eye, you two." He indicated the prisoners. "Deliver the merchandise." As the men slid over the side, Darling came bouncing out of the mob. Raven hollered at her, but of course she could not hear. She scrambled aboard, carrying a doll Raven had carved. It was dressed neatly in clothing of a superb miniature detail. She handed it to me and started flashing her finger language. Raven hollered again. I tried to interrupt, but Darling was intent on telling me about the doll's wardrobe. She was not. Oh, sorry. She had a mind like a razor. She knew what she was doing when she boarded that carpet. She was stealing a chance to fly. Honey, I said, both aloud and with signs, you've got to get off. We're going. Raven yelled in outrage as Howler lifted off. One Eye, Goblin, and Silent all glared at him. He howled, and the carpet continued to rise. Sit down, I told Darling. She did so, not far from Feather. She forgot the doll and wanted to know about our adventure. I told her. It kept me occupied. She spent more time looking over the side than paying attention to me, yet she missed nothing. When I finished, she looked at Feather and Journey with adult pity. She was unconcerned about my appointment with the lady, though she did give me a reassuring hug goodbye.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
so Darling's adorable. I
yeah,
mean, she's the one beacon of light in this grim world, which is like my main concern moving forward with the series is I don't want to see her become a hardened and jaded white rose.
yeah, right. So Darling is definitely something that we have to pull out, and I think this is maybe just the point to talk about Darling in general because, she's introduced where she's just in the most horrible situation imaginable, and Raven saves her. It's like his first moment of being an actually good person and not just a violent person. And then she's kind of in the background of the story the whole time, right? She's
Yeah,
deaf mute, and she's able to pick up sign language, and she just kind of like brings joy and happiness to everyone in the company who interacts with her, and is kind of almost like a mascot to them. And this is all in the background, right? Like we have no real
mm,
indication that she's going to be super important until close to the end when we get hints like, okay, she seems to be immune to magic that wipes everybody else out, and
yeah,
like, yeah, basically we're supposed to conclude she's probably the White Rose. But
yeah. Just about everyone but Croaker figures it out. Towards the end of the battle at Charm. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I just it's a fun thing to put into the story, and I think without Darling, it would be a very different book actually. 'Cause you would just have these dour, violent men. Plus,
yeah.
yeah,
She brings a light to the company, and that comes across in every time she's mentioned throughout. Even the card games and stuff. And as we already touched on when we talked about Raven, she's kind of the only thing that humanizes him to any degree in
yeah,
the story. So she's yeah, I mean she's the one kind of good and pure thing in the story, and
yeah,
I don't want that taken away in the future books.
yeah. I agree. I agree. I'm kind of worried about the future books.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, next page. So here, the lady, the evil witch who's in charge of everything and who has taken a special interest in Croaker, states the thesis statement of the whole book.
Pretty much.
My husband isn't dead. You know that. He's behind it all. He's been awakening. Very slowly, but enough to have reached some of the circle. Enough to have touched the females among the taken. They'll do anything for him, the bitches. I watch them as close as I can, but I'm not infallible. They get away with things. This battle isn't what it seems. The rebel army was brought here by members of the circle under my husband's influence. The fools. They thought they could use him to defeat me and grab power for themselves. They are all gone now, slain, but the thing they set in motion goes on. I'm not fighting the White Rose analyst, though a victory over that silliness could come from this as well. I'm fighting the old slaver, the dominator. And if I lose the world. Cunning woman. She did not assume the role of maiden in distress. She played it as one equal to another. That won my sympathy more surely. She knew I knew the Dominator as well as any mundane now alive. Knew I must fear him far more than her, for who fears a woman more than a man? I know you, analyst. I have opened your soul and peered inside. You fight for me because your company has undertaken a commission it will pursue to the bitter end, because its principal personalities feel its honor was stained in beryl. And that, though most of you think you are serving evil. Evil is relative, analyst. You can't hang a sign on it. You can't touch it or taste it or cut it with a sword. Evil depends on where you are standing, pointing your indicting finger. Where you stand now, because of your oath, is opposite the Dominator. For you, he is where your evil lies. She paced a moment, perhaps anticipating a response. I made none. She had encapsulated my own philosophy. That's
Yeah, I mean, as you said, that's pretty much, the Black Company .txt.
yeah,
Um, I mean, I like this. I like her not trying to pretend that she's good. She's like, I'm evil, but they're eviler. So, honor says that you should be on my side, and there's a sort of justification for it. So off you go.
yeah. I guess that works until somebody actually good comes along that you can side with, which is
Yes,
maybe the appeal of the
how
White Rose.
yeah, that's basically how the book ends. And I mean, I guess the other thing is the reveal of Soulcatcher's identity at the end of the book. I think mitigates our understanding that the lady is so much better than the Dominator.
Yeah, right. I think she's definitely. I mean, there's some truth here, but I think she's definitely being manipulative here. Like it is it is a calculated display of vulnerability. It's not just she's tipping her hand to him.
Yes, I mean nobody. No, nobody ever seems to question that the Dominator is worse, so I guess I'll take everyone's word for it. But yeah, there is the sort of sense it's like, okay, well, once we've stopped the Dominator, why would we stick with you if you're that bad? You're second in line for needing to be gotten rid of, right?
Right, right. I mean, he's like we said earlier in the slides. They presided over an empire worse than hell. It's great, great description. But like, yeah, like we haven't seen anything from her that makes her think she'll be better. And by the end of this book, she is perfectly happy with the outcome that like hundreds of thousands of people have died, and that was her goal actually.
Yeah, it's she's not just happy with it. It's by design so
Yeah,
that they can't be used against her.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I mean, but yeah, I like this. I mean, I guess having having been exposed to the last 20 years of media and reading things like A Song of Ice and Fire, it's not super revolutionary to me, this idea of everyone's shit. Um,
yeah.
but I do like the way this book handles it with taking someone like Croker who's trying to believe that that's not the case and kind of consistently getting proven wrong.
That's a good point, viewing it in context, right? Because like not just is everyone shit, but at least everyone is a person.
Mm,
Like we were talking about earlier, like you never really hear what Sauron's thinking about things or what the Witch King is thinking about things because they're not people. Like they're clearly like the Witch King of Angmar is a 1,000-year-old lich with like who knows what motivates him anymore, right? Like I think he's just like a creature of pure spite and
yeah,
like but like everyone, even the evilest of the evil in this book are people.
yeah.
And
The lady
yeah,
has opinions and
and
expresses them, and yeah,
and so does Soulcatcher, and probably so does the Limper actually. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, like no, I like your point that like this was probably fresh at the time. It's just like yeah, now Song of Ice and Fire has kind of taken this idea and actually gone in what I would call even more interesting directions with it, where you have the Jaime Lannister type.
yeah,
We're gonna make you hate this guy, and then we're gonna make you love him because that's how good George R. R. Martin is.
yeah, absolutely.
All right, next slide.
So this is after the big battle at Charm has sort of been decided, and Croker and the lady sort of take off to hunt down Soulcatcher, who's the one remaining member of the Taken. So Croker starts filling her full with arrows and says, "I loosed my shaft, and another." Recalling the terrible vitality the Limper had shown in the forest of Cloud after Raven had felled him with an arrow bearing the power of his true name. Still in fear, I drew my sword once my final arrow was gone. I charged. I do not know how I retained the weapon through everything that had happened. I reached Catcher, raised the blade high, swung with a vicious two-handed stroke. It was the most fearful, violent blow I have ever struck. Soulcatcher's head rolled away. The Morian's face guard popped open. A woman's face stared at me with accusing eyes. A woman almost identical in appearance to the one with whom I had come. Catcher's eyes focused upon me. Her lips tried to form words. I stood there, frozen, wondering what the hell it all meant. And life faded from Catcher before I caught the message she tried to impart. I would return to that moment 10,000 times, trying to read those dying lips.
So this is
And
pretty tragic, right?
oh yeah, I mean, this was the moment where sort of any pretense that the lady isn't that bad disappears from my head,
Yeah,
because this is the sister that Soulcatcher told us the lady had killed,
yeah.
presumably.
And once again, we have this scenario where um, the lady has taken Catcher specifically as her right hand to help her in this mission to kill her sister, and he's the one who does it, right? Like
Mm,
she and I don't know. I struggle with this because I'm not saying the book is making a mistake. I'm saying that I'm just not sure what the book is doing with this idea. Like that I don't know why Croker goes along with this because he knows that Soulcatcher is more complicated. He knows the lady is definitely super evil. He even suspects that the reason why Soulcatcher is running is that she's trying to do some clever. She's either trying to escape or she's trying to get some information that can be used against the lady, and or at least work against the lady in some way. And he knows she's bad. So like, is he working for her because he's been brainwashed by the eye, or is that it? Is it that simple?
I think there's, I mean, because there's a bit where it's mentioned, and we've talked about this, like the Taken sometimes see glimpses of the future,
Uh huh.
and it seems like Croker does that at one point as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a reveal in the later books that the lady has taken a little bit more influence over Croker than he has realized at this point.
Uh huh.
Um, so yeah, that's part of it. I mean, he's also way out of his depth. You know, he's just some medic who could kind of shoot a bow and arrow, who's being taken on magic carpets by like super powered witches. I guess it's kind of, if they say jump, he has to say how high.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. I guess that's why I'm fixated on this. Is it's like it says it's the most fearful, violent blow I ever struck, but he's not striking it out of like rage or hate or
mm,
revenge. It's like he kind of likes Soulcatcher actually.
yeah,
Everything in the text leads us to assume that, but he does that because the lady is there with him, and it's going to be worse for him if he doesn't. I guess, I guess it doesn't matter exactly. Well, it certainly matters. I was left feeling pretty uncertain about it. But yeah, I think you're right that he's just out of his depth, and he just has to do what he's told basically because he's a soldier. That's a good point.
I wouldn't also be surprised if a little part of him's angry that Soulcatcher's betraying them slash, not including him. Like at the
Uh
very
huh.
least, he does. He's like terrified of the lady, but I believe there's a part of him who feels quite good about how specially she's treating him up until this point where he really fully turns on her.
Yeah.
Like inside, but yeah, I don't know.
That's true. Yeah, I guess I forget at what point in the book he does make that transition in his heart where prior to that point he is more or less loyally serving her. Like
Mm,
he's like the company's serving her, so I'm serving her. And then it is you're right, it is about this point that he kind of shifts and he's like, "Oh, maybe she's actually super evil." Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, there's definitely a point where he starts to feel like Soulcatcher was just using them, which I mean is ironic given that that's clearly what the lady is doing right
Uh-huh.
now as well. But yeah, I think there is this sort of sense that he does like Soulcatcher, but there's a sense that Soulcatcher betrayed him at one point up until he kills her.
Yeah. Which she did. The betrayal was that she was trying to kind of work toward the aim of setting up the White Rose somehow. Sarah Penguin makes it a point, which could just be that he's afraid Soulcatcher is gonna kill him if he doesn't kill her first, which is
Yeah, that's a fair point.
yeah might be an element there.
It should be.
Yeah,
Like,
I feel like I'm fixating on this thing, but I felt like it was pretty important to understand exactly why he was doing what he was doing, and I never quite felt like I was understanding that, especially toward the end there. But I think I think you might have helped me work it out a little bit there. So,
yeah, okay. No, I agree. It's like it feels like there's more to be understood about Croker's actions in this book.
or maybe even you could take the perspective of like when you're fighting, like again, if Glenn Cook was really in the military, if you're really fighting in a real life and death situation, you're probably not processing things on the level of like, hold on, let me make sure that I have all of my moral justifications lined up. You're just like, oh, we're fighting. Who are we fighting? Those guys. All right, here I got my sword. Okay, you know, just pure kind of animal level, which does
Yeah.
that does kind of seem the way he's processing things in this scene. So
No, you're right. That makes sense. You kind of have to switch the higher level parts of your brain off in combat and just focus on staying alive.
yeah, cool. Well, now I feel like we have like five different reasons why, but I'm not sure which one it is. But anyway, all right. This is our last slide, actually. So here, Croaker and Silent catch up with Raven and Darling after they've run away, and the groups say their goodbyes. I took the money bag from my bedroll, tossed it to Raven. You left your share of the Rose's take. I brought up the spare horses. You could travel faster if you were riding. Raven struggled with himself, trying to say thank you, unable to get through the barriers he had built around the man inside. Guess we could head toward... I don't want to know. I've met the Eye twice already. She's got a thing about getting her side down for posterity. Not that she wants to look good, just that she wants it down true. She knows how history rewrites itself. She doesn't want that to happen to her, and I'm the boy she's picked to do the writing. Get out, Croaker. Come with us. You and Silent, come with us. It had been a long, lonely night. I had thought about it a lot. Can't, Raven. The captain has to stay where he's at, even if you don't like it. The company has to stay. I'm company. I'm too old to run away from home. We'll fight the same fight, you and me, but I'll do my share staying with the family. Come on, Croaker. A bunch of mercenary cutthroats. Whoa, hold it. My voice hardened more than I wanted. He stopped. I said, remember that night in Lord's, before we went after Whisper, when I read from the annals what you said? He did not respond for several seconds. Yes, that you made me feel what it meant to be a member of the Black Company. All right. Maybe I don't understand, but I did feel it. I told Silent, let's go home, and we rode away. Neither of us looked back. It was an incident that never happened. After all, hadn't Raven and his orphan died at the gates of Charm? Back to the company. Back to business. Back to the parade of years. Back to the annals. Back to fear. 37 years before the comet returns. The vision has to be false. I'll never survive that long, will I? It's great. I thought that second to last bit in particular, back to the company, back to business, back to the parade of years, back to the annals, back to fear. That's just such a great, like those are like that's just all of the important things to his character laid out in a way that is very like affirming and
Yeah.
emotional. I found, for all the fact that I might not have found the book very emotional because it's being told by this kind of sarcastic and detached protagonist, I found the last few pages very affecting emotionally.
Yeah, and I think they are for Croker, which is why that comes through. Because I agree. There's like, I mean, I like even when you were just reading it out now, I was just yelling in my head, going, "No, just go with him, you idiot! Um,
Yeah.
what are you doing?" Uh, and this is a decision that just makes sense with everything we know about Croker and how much he loves the company, and he's not going to leave it, even though he really should. And yeah, I mean, this is another thing. I can't wait to see where this loyalty to the company above all else goes in the future books. Because what are they going to have to do now that the lady is presumably in charge? Wait, not good things, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, where else in the book does he think, or rather, does he frequently think of the company as the family? Does he frequently call it that? I don't remember.
Not often, I don't think.
I just think it's interesting that it crops up here because it's just re-emphasizing this aspect of his character where he prioritizes it so highly that he's literally willing to, I don't want to say abandon, but like it's pretty obvious that, I don't know, it just seems kind of hollow to say like we're both going to be fighting the same fight, but I'm going to be doing it while serving the lady somehow. I mean, I guess he could try to just kind of do a, subtle disobedience type thing, but like what is he really going to be able to do where he's sitting?
Yeah, fine line to walk, I think.
Yeah, I guess it makes me curious. This is a series I might continue. We end up doing the first books of 137 different fantasy series in the book club. Some of them I continue later on my own. Some of them we continue on the book club, albeit rarely. But this is one that I'm curious to find out what happens next. And I did like Croaker. I would be curious to know if Croaker is the analyst, the protagonist of the later books.
I mean, I don't know how many there are, but I'd have to believe he'd be the protagonist of at least the next one. And, fantasy always comes in trilogies, so probably number three as well. Um, I think there's more than three,
I
but
think there are. I think there's actually a ton.
okay.
uh,
Yeah, maybe they're not all Croaker. I feel like, yeah, I'd be interested to hear others' perspectives. I guess it's probably unlikely we'd maybe get like, One Eye or Silent or Raven, but it'd be fun to jump into different periods in the Black Company's history as well.
yeah. So there's four books called the Books in the North. There's two books called the Books in the South. There's four books called the Books of Glittering Stone, and then there are actually forthcoming novels in the series. So this
Oh wow,
series
it's
that
still going.
began in 1984, and it is still ongoing. Is it still ongoing by the same author? Because
That's
that's
impressive.
because that's the thing that happens sometimes. Yeah, it looks like it's still. Yeah, wow, cool, good for Glenn Cook. Um, yeah,
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'll be able to get through all of those, but I'd at least like to finish the Lady in the White Rose arc, assuming that they don't stick with this for the whole series.
yeah, yeah. Maybe somebody can just let us know if that concludes within the first three or four books. Uh,
Um, yeah, actually, David Hunt just pointed out in the comments that the company do call each other brothers a lot, so
okay, yeah.
that reference Croker makes to family holds.
He also points out that there hasn't been a new book in over a decade, so maybe it's wrapping up. All right, so yeah, let's just hang out for a second. If anybody has any comments or questions or just wants to chat about the book for a minute before we wrap up. Um, I mean, yeah, I think in retrospect, like I enjoyed this book while reading it. I really did actually,
Mm.
and I liked a lot of the stuff that it was trying to do. I just felt like there were certain things which I think I may have gotten a little bit hung up on toward the end of the discussion there, but I'm just like felt like there was a lack of clarity around motivations, which hampered my uh, ability to connect. Which, yeah, I don't know, just overall. Kirk McDonald mentions like it's been a really influential series. Like,
Mm.
um, we talked about George R. R. Martin. I think that I don't actually know this for a fact, but like it seems apparent just from just kind of subjectively that this story and the way it was written probably did influence Song of Ice and Fire, maybe directly, maybe indirectly.
Yeah, I mean, because like I've seen a lot of discussion about how Song of Ice and Fire are kind of a response to Tolkien as well, and we obviously talked a lot about how we think this book is the same. Uh, and like so I wouldn't be surprised to learn that George R. R. Martin was familiar with these books as well and wanted to do his own spin on that kind of thing to some extent.
Yeah,
Because yeah, I actually wasn't really familiar with the term grimdark before looking into this book series, and it's interesting sort of learning about how this is considered like the grandfather of fantasy grimdark stuff,
uh-huh.
alongside the world of Warhammer.
Yeah. I'd heard about this book for a long time, but I'd never really realized that it was influential. I just thought it was popular. Um,
I mean, it's aged well. Like, I still think it can stand on its own two legs. Like
yeah,
aside from being influential, which is obviously like a perk, I do think it stands on its own two legs.
yeah. Kirk is also saying that there's a lot of Black Company influence in the Malazan Book of the Fallen books, which I have not read, but I've heard that those are pretty popular too. So, that's cool. Like, I feel like I've benefited from reading this. Like you just said, it was a good book on its own account, but also like I feel like I understand kind of the world of fantasy a little bit more now.
Mm,
Because these things definitely do influence each other, and there's like a reaction and then a reaction to a reaction, and influence and influences and so forth. Um,
yeah. Oh,
and
like I pretty much can guarantee that the next 10 years of fantasy are going to be filled with grimdark, A Song of Ice and Fire clones.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
yeah,
Yeah. What I mean, yeah. I mean, I think Song of Ice and Fire was influential even before the TV show, and now it's going to be even worse.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Marshall's actually brought up in the comments again that the Black Company or Glenn Cook was the first to sort of write high fantasy from the perspective of just like a lowly soldier.
Uh-huh.
Which makes sense given the military background that was talked about before, and makes sense because that's something I would sort of take for granted these days, is the idea of the perspective of not the hero, but just some random on the field.
Uh-huh.
But it's interesting if it was one of the first to sort of do that in this genre.
Yeah. I mean, even most of the books we've done for book club have been, oh, they're secretly the chosen one. You know, they're actually a Mistborn. They're actually a super powerful wizard. But I think Croker is literally just the medic of the Black Company. There's
Yeah.
very little special about him. I'll be surprised if we learn that he's like secretly destined to be something other than somebody who helps out the actual important person.
Yeah, I kept getting the impression that that might be where the book is heading, but I kind of oh, so the series. I
Yeah,
kind of hope it's not though, because I agree. It's more interesting if he's just some random medic slash historian who's accidentally ended up like really far down the deep end of the pool, and he's just struggling to stay afloat.
yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, I mean, people in the chat are making me feel like I haven't been keeping up on my fantasy genre history because like again, I've heard about these for a long time, but never in the same sentence as like, oh yes, these books defined the last 30 years of fantasy, which it
Hmm.
seems like they did basically.
I mean, yeah, that seems to be. They seem to have been very influential. Yeah.
Like I wouldn't
If
call. Go ahead. Sorry.
oh, no, you go.
I was gonna say like people argue about what is grimdark and what isn't grimdark. I think the point is that maybe this book introduced and popularized the idea of making like showing the human side of things, showing like the everything and everyone is shit side of things, like we kind of said earlier,
Hmm.
and that is something that has been in a lot of recent. I say recent. It's Song of Ice and Fire has been going on for almost as long as this series has. So
Well, yeah. Game of Thrones would have only been like 10 or 11 years after this book, I think.
right,
So, um,
yeah,
there's shorter distance between these two books than Game of Thrones and now. Um, yeah, I agree. I do quite enjoy the trend of going towards like the more human focus, like focusing on how humans deal with things in high fantasy. It's a very interesting angle, and as you said, I still don't think it's something that's been explored as much as it could be by various bits of fantasy that I've seen. Maybe I'm just reading the wrong books. Uh, but it's always fun to kind of see how a normal person tries to cope with like all the bullshit that magic can entail.
yeah, yeah. I like it too. Well, it looks like the discussion has died down, so I think that we're gonna. Whoops, he's gonna hide that again. Gonna wrap up. I'm gonna save that for the big reveal. Okay. Um, so yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in live. For those of you listening on the podcast later, you should come hang out with us next month. It's lots of fun. So now we're going to introduce the book that we're going to read next month, and it is Middle Game by, is that Shannon? Shannon McGuire? I don't
Shonen McGuire?
Shannon.
I'm not sure.
I don't know how to say that name, but the book is Middle Game, and this
Sorry,
was
Mr. McGuire.
this was yeah, Mr. McGuire. There you go. This was a so every 6 months, Scott or I will pick the book. It will not be a vote. It will just be we'll pick one. This month it's Scott's pick, so he's picking Middle Game. Um, and I know nothing about this really. I kind of glanced at the summary of it. It looked intriguing. But anyway, we're going to be meeting to discuss that book Friday, October 25th at 9 p.m. Central Time. You can reach out to us with questions and comments about this book or about about Black Company or about Middle Game at doofmedia@gmail.com or on Twitter at doofmedia. If you like what we do here at Doof Media and you want to see more of it, then you can head over to patreon.com/doofmedia and consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. And if you do so, you'll get access to our private Discord server, as well as the ability to vote for which books we cover, unless it's months like this one, and tons of other cool benefits. So go check that out.
Yes, that's right. And just quickly, we've been corrected by David in the comments. It's actually Miss Maguire, which shows what a terrible grasp on the name that we had.
I'm fired. Yeah.
So yes, but as Matt said, it's great if you join us live. There was a ton of discussion we didn't pull out from people in the comments, sort of engaging with each other. So it's really worth coming live if you can. And if you have any other questions or comments before the 25th, when we come back for Middle Game, hit us up on Twitter at doofmedia or email us at doofmedia@gmail.com.
It's pronounced
so apart from that,
Shonen. Sorry.
Shonen. Okay.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you all next month.
See ya.
Sorry about that ending, everyone. All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. It was a good one. Thanks for joining us, Elliot.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was great. As I said, I'm glad I got to read this book. I would have dropped this book about a third of the way in if I hadn't needed to finish it for this. So I'm glad I was forced to stick through it because it was actually I really enjoyed the second half.
Yeah, I don't think I would have got as much out of it if I hadn't been thinking about it in terms of like, okay, what am I going to say about this? Because he is doing a lot of interesting stuff with the background elements that are kind of easy to miss.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, so I'll go ahead and stop my recording.
Okay, I will too, and I'm going to end the stream. So, goodbye, everyone who has been hanging out with us, and we will see you next month.